Hello, everyone. This is the first episode of the Martin Squared podcast, and it went a little long, so this is going to be part one of the first episode, our first conversation together. Enjoy.
Sun comes up and rises high. It's so hot, it's gonna make me cry. Oh Lord, oh Lord.
Okay, we have the inaugural version of the Martin Squared podcast. We are Chris and Matt, and if you guessed, the Martin part is our last name. We're going to be talking about cigars, one of our passions, coffee, football, a number of things, really.
Pretty much everything that comes to our minds, we are going to let everybody enjoy. Pretty much every single one of our ideas, we're going to let everybody know what's on our minds, what's in our hearts, and
what we're smoking.
Exactly, and what's going on kind of in our little realm of the earth.
And if you don't enjoy this, well, that's okay. We're just going for a little BSing, friendly BSing between brothers, and we've been talking about this for probably about a year.
About a year now. We started this about a year ago.
Well, we started talking about it about a year ago. Finally, within the last couple of weeks, I guess we finally kind of figured out what we wanted to talk about and have gotten together. To start off with the cigar, kind of the main ingredient to this podcast, DBL Second Generacion, if I'm saying that correctly. My Spanish is not very good. Brother, take it away with a little introduction.
Well, yes, you are. It's DBL, which is known as Dominican Big Leaguer. The cigar is made by a Francisco Almonte. This one is the Second Generacion. It's an exclusive, limited edition cigar. To give you a little backstory about Francisco and the cigar, Francisco Almonte actually started in the tobacco industry at 7 years old.
Wow.
Actually deveining tobacco leaves for his father, who was working in the industry as well.
When you're a kid, you get put to work. That makes sense.
Yeah, and started rolling cigars when he was 12 years old. So Francisco's been in the business for a long time.
Sure.
Actually worked under both Carlos Fuente of the well-known Arturo Fuente cigars brand, and Lito Gomez made famous the La Flor Dominicana brand of cigars. So he has a deep history and a really good pedigree as far as smoking, as far as rolling cigars and being in the tobacco industry.
Okay,
the
real quick.
cigar industry.
Real quick, so our friends that are not into cigars, or maybe you smoke cigarettes or whatever, if you don't, it's not your thing. Very quickly, I think for me, my brother is the one who got me into cigars a number of years back, and it's you could call it a vice, sure, but really it's a passion. Even though my knowledge of cigars and my palate for cigar flavors is not that good, but I really do enjoy the flavors, the different kinds, the different colors, and different notes that you can have in a cigar. This particular one, I tried out just for the first time yesterday on the advice of our friend Danny Jones,
who we're actually recording this podcast. He was so gracious to let us use his place of business and one of his side rooms in his tobacco shop. So we thank Danny Jones for letting us use his office.
Absolutely. And really enjoyed this particular cigar yesterday. Matt, I believe you've had it before, right?
Yes,
okay.
I smoked it last week. Danny brought them in to his shop, and he actually wound up having a little cigar event this past Thursday, at his shop. Francisco showed up. I unfortunately was not able to attend.
Yeah, I wasn't either.
From what I heard from Danny, it was a major success.
And you got to try one of the hand-rolled cigars that he personally made during that event. How was that? Give us a little flavor of that.
It was it was fantastic. It had a Sumatran wrapper on it. It was smooth, I didn't really get a whole lot of bite to it. Had a little bit of cinnamon spice notes.
Sure.
But well crafted, well constructed. It was just a fantastic cigar.
Okay.
Now, going back to the DBL second generation, let's go ahead and cut the cap.
Indeed, sir. This is one of the things I'm even to this day, after, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years of smoking cigars more often, more frequently, I'm still on occasion not very good at. Matt, I think, is going to be the resident expert, if you will, especially compared to my knowledge of cigars. Now, what are your impressions right off the bat with the cold draw?
So far, the cold draw, I'm getting...
Which is simply just, you cut the cap and you puff on it like you would if it was lit, but you can get some of the flavors already, even without lighting it.
I'm getting a lot of smooth textures to my palate. Most of the time with the cold draw, you get it's a little bit more of a bite and harshness, but I'm getting some really good smooth notes. I'm getting a lot of just a little hint of cinnamon out of the cold draw.
Okay.
All right. So now that we've perfect cut on both sides, now let's go ahead and light cigar. We're getting a nice, even toast to the end of the cigar.
A lot that goes into the lighting portion, because if you don't get a very even lighting, then you're going to end up having more of it. I guess this is pretty intuitive. You're going to have more of it where it's burning faster than the other parts of it.
You're going to have a lot of burn issues. One side may burn faster than the other. The inside may not be as hot, or coincidentally, the core of the cigar may wind up burning hotter than the outside. So,
of course, issues that after a while of smoking, you tend to kind of find yourself weeding out, or you learn from other people on the best ways to do that, to smoke better. I did a little research online myself when I was when I finally started getting into this more full time. I should say more frequently, and it's certainly not as simple as what you see in the movies. You bite the cap off, you light it on the end for 2 seconds. I tend to take a little bit more time to light mine.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the one thing in lighting a cigar, toasting the end, getting a good draw off of it. If you just start putting a torch or some sort of flame to the end of the cigar and just start taking draws off of it, you're going to wind up getting the end of the cigar really, really hot. The flavors aren't going to be as good, and it won't wind up becoming enjoyable,
right?
For most cigar smokers,
it won't be what the makers intended for you to experience. Now, personally, I do prefer, even though I don't have any right now, lighting my cigars with matches. If you're outside and doing that, the wind usually is a factor. So
which we're recording this podcast in our hometown of Amarillo, Texas,
right,
which is known to be the second windiest, if not the highest wind producer in the
United States. I'm trying to remember some place in Washington in a higher elevation where the average wind speed was higher, but this has been a couple years.
I thought it was Wichita, Kansas. That was actually higher average wind speed.
I think you're actually correct on that. Our average, last time I looked, it's been a few years, but our average wind speed, all right, we're talking, you take up the lowest wind speed over a period of time, the highest wind speed over a period of time, about 14 miles per hour. Now, that doesn't sound that great, but that is including so many days, like we're going to have a few, with wind gusts over 40 miles per hour, that kind of a situation.
Right.
People around the Panhandle are certainly used to that.
Right.
And cigar smokers around the Panhandle are used to just going indoors. Though I do enjoy smoking outside, for sure.
I definitely do enjoy smoking outside. I enjoy smoking outside on my patio. Definitely with it being December, it's not as enjoyable, but mainly during the June, July, even
absolutely.
May. I usually don't during August because of the temperature really,
Sure.
really soaring here in the Texas Panhandle.
Well, and one other thing that we frequently do during the summer, as often as we can, is smoke outside, and then along with coffee, which we haven't mentioned. The coffee's not a sponsor where we got them from, so we won't mention. But one of the local places here in town.
Right.
I got a breve. I enjoy that with a little of the half and half. You want the headbanger?
Yeah, they call it a headbanger. It's their normal brewed coffee with a couple extra shots of espresso in it.
Both coffee lovers. I used to not
Yes.
be, but
well,
we definitely
neither
are
one
now.
of us used to be coffee
That's a good
lovers.
point.
I remember when both of us were younger, especially me, the coffee, I would maybe fill a coffee cup half coffee, but the rest of it cream and sugar. So
Well, there's some days you just got to have that. But anyway, so that's what we're pairing with this. Our different tastes in the coffee. Give me some impressions that you're getting off the bat here. As far as I'm concerned, of course, I tasted this yesterday. Very smooth. Not hardly any bitterness. I guess I'm kind of echoing some of the cold draw comments you had.
I'm getting paired with the coffee. It's the coffee's a little overpowering, but that was to be expected.
Well, you go pretty strong with it, so.
Absolutely. I'm getting man. It's a little sweet. Some sweet notes. Very very smooth cigar, almost like a cinnamon sugar
Okay.
note.
Okay.
This thing is. I can already tell you this thing is going to be a major hit with local brick and mortars, local tobacco shops all across the country.
Right.
This one's definitely going to be a very fantastic cigar once people kind of get more knowledge of the brand, of the owner. This is actually known as a kind of medium to medium full in strength.
Right. Totally agree with
The
that.
wrapper is a Cameroon leaf that is sun grown in Ecuador.
Okay.
So that's kind of where the sweetness plays. A lot of Ecuadorian wrappers have a sweetness, like a dark fruit.
Sure.
No, most of them that I've smoked.
Okay.
The binder and filler are both Dominican, which I mean, this factory is based out of the Dominican Republic.
Right. Which, by the way, just a side note here for our non-cigar smoking friends, you often probably hear about Cuban cigars in pop culture, and well, they're not that great.
They're not. I mean, most of the high-end Cuban cigars can hold their own, but I mean, it's a very, very limited amount. Maybe, I would go so far as to say maybe 5 or 6 Cuban cigars I would smoke.
Sure.
I mean, I've smoked my fair share, and
Yeah.
pretty much I would only. They are, as far as the best Cuban I've ever smoked, doesn't even top my top 20 cigars all time.
Right. And a lot of that, you have to understand when the embargo went into effect, back in the 60s with, after the Cuban Revolution. Well, there was a lot of hype for the thing. There's always a bunch of hype for the thing that you cannot have, right? I mean, that's the case in life. The crush that you have from afar, a friend of yours, or I'm speaking hypothetically, of course.
It's the ultimate, the thing that you can't have, you desire the most.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And so the hype for Cuban cigars really kind of grew out of that. And at the time, it was, at least in North America, South America, the cigar industry, as I understand it, I mean, the Cubans were kind of leading the way at that point. But then after that point, and here we go in a little bit of history lesson here, you had people who defected from Cuba, who growers, producers, and they wanted to do their stuff, and they found amazing spots in, a lot in South America.
Yeah, mainly in the Dominican Republic, here in the U.S., in Miami.
Right.
Honduras is another one. Nicaragua. One thing that I especially recommend to cigar smokers, it's one of the podcasts I listen to. In fact, that's kind of the reason why me and Chris decided to do this, because both of us listen to various podcasts.
Yeah.
One of the podcasts I actually listen to is called the Cigar Dave Show podcast. He had Jose O. Padron of the Padron Cigar family, had an interview with him. It's definitely it's a two-part interview. I definitely suggest people check that out and listen to it. Jose definitely gives kind of a backstory on how he started in the business, when he left Cuba, how things were, how he started in very small surroundings to become as big of a cigar manufacturer as he is. So that's definitely one. That's definitely
one you definitely have to check out.
And it goes back to defecting from Cuba somewhere else.
That's the stories of cigar makers, whether you're into this kind of thing or not, pretty fascinating to see people unfortunately having to leave their own country and make their way, somewhere else. But that's really the story of so many Americans. I mean, so many of our ancestors, Native Americans aside, but really, rich history there. But
even then, the origin of Native Americans is could come from different countries as well.
True. Well, we'll get back to the cigar in just a bit. One thing that we are involved in here at Jones Cowan is a fantasy football league, which brings us the 12 of us that are playing. This is our second year. Brings us so much joy. Some of us, and others just so much frustration, and really comes down to Well, just say what you're going to say, Matt.
Well, both of us, our particular league here is a 12-team point per reception league. 6 points for touchdowns all across the board. Passing, receiving, rushing.
We don't have to go into the whole details here, but really what he wanted to say, and I guess I'm going to steal his thunder here.
Well, we were both Chris and I were vying for the playoffs. Last week was our first week of the playoffs, so 2 weeks ago, you had the 6th spot and the final spot in the playoffs.
6 and 7, and I was pretty happy about that.
Yes, I had the 7th spot. Going into our final week of the regular season, I needed to beat my opponent, who was already locked into the playoffs. Your opponent was going into last week was a cupcake opponent. He had the worst record in the league.
Yeah, he did.
Guess what happened, ladies and gentlemen? He lost. I won. That made both of us. That tied us.
Yeah, we were at 6 and 7 at that point.
Record at 6 and 7, which the tiebreaker was total points for. I had him beat by about 60 points, so I wound up as the 6th seed. Coincidentally, I actually won my.
Your first round.
Won in the first round last week, so I'm going up against the 2 seed in the league, which is actually Danny Jones, who owns Jones Cowan Pipe and Tobacco Shop.
And props to Danny, by the way. Last season was his first season, I think, in a while.
First season ever to play fantasy football. In fact, there was only last season. There was only maybe 4 or 5 of us that had ever done fantasy football. Now I've been doing it. Both of us have been doing it for about 5 years now.
Yeah,
I've been in a couple big money leagues, and I did great in one, and I kind of got shafted in another.
But again, props for we won't talk about that. Props for Danny, because he went from last year
being one of the worst records to this year having one of the best records.
Yeah, hit second seed going to the playoffs. So again, very very nice. He's kept up with his stuff and he knows his stuff.
Now there is one thing I wanted to ask you. I know you and I haven't been playing this game a whole lot. What's your favorite way to play? I mean, there's different kinds. Everybody talks about standard league options, which mainly is just for yards and touchdowns.
Okay.
Now we play in a point per reception league. I like it to a certain degree.
Okay. Sure.
I think I also kind of like having punt return and kick return yards play a factor because.
It could change the game up so much.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, it's not every single kick return, punt return, you're going to have the same guys that are going to be kicked too. So there's immense potential to just blow you out of the water if you get a return and come back for a touchdown. We're going to take just a break for a few moments here to pause for a few ads. I'm just kidding. We're not sponsored just yet. Anyway. Exactly. You got to figure out some music for that. But to answer your question, I haven't really paid all that much attention to that. But I can make my brother laugh. It feels a good day. But I have enjoyed this one so far in that I think I've had the most points. This is going to sound very simplistic to say. I've had the most points playing fantasy football. I think the entire time I played, which I did the first time I played was back in 2007, and I didn't play again until like 3 years ago.
Coincidentally, 2007 was, obviously the first year I got into it as well. And the league that I kind of came up with, it was a 4-team league. Both you and I were in it along with our uncle.
No. See, I went 2007. That league was in. Hang on, that was 3 years ago.
No, that was not 3 years ago.
It was 3 or 4 years ago.
It was. I think it had to have been.
2007. I wasn't back here in Amarillo after college yet.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
My apologies.
But speaking of the league he's talking about, 4 people.
Yeah, 4 teams,
including our uncle.
Pretty much every team in that league had just a monster roster.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And who won that year?
Sadly, that would be you after basically not doing anything at all during the first 13 weeks of the season.
I really wasn't paying any attention back then.
And then he finally got his crap together and started actually playing and changing his roster up and all like that. Yeah. Winds up winning the league, albeit free. It was totally about bragging rights, but
but for at least 6 months, I was still kind of bragging about that.
And you can also say that you have won a league title, whereas I have not.
So, what I find funny about this particular round or this season, so. Our uncle's also playing in the league, Tony, and he didn't make it to the playoffs this season. You made it to the playoffs, but he and I did not.
Pretty much his team name says it all, from King to Jester.
Well, he did change that after not making it to the playoffs, but yeah.
That's true, but still, that's still pretty much.
And it's kind of funny to think about because he does some of those daily leagues. I forget which ones he's involved with. Not only football, but I think he does college football and hockey
and baseball and basketball.
Which he never really paid attention to much in the way of sports, except for football, until he got into that. And it's just funny to think
me for that as well.
What?
You can blame me for a lot of things. I'm definitely
sure.
in our little group of friends, I'm considered a bad influence on people because I got. You got me into cigars, though. I appreciate that. I got our uncle into smoking cigars.
Very true.
I got you into smoking cigars. I got both of you into playing fantasy football.
Right. Well, I just find it ironic, though, that he's spent so much time playing in the daily leagues where he's putting up money daily. And he's had some decent success, not widespread, but some decent success.
More so than I have. I
haven't even touched this.
I had one big week where I won like $100 and thought I was on top of the world, and pretty much I've completely crap the bed every single time after that. So.
That's a funny phrase there, but I think it's funny that he's okay at that.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular season in this league, in which there's the potential for some cigars if you get in the money essentially, and it just hasn't worked out well
And
for him. But that I think that speaks a lot to the luck that is involved in fantasy
absolutely.
football. And we've had this conversation about certain elements of the roster and changing things and taking away some of that. But really, it's very exciting. Jump in there. You've got your players. They're set to have a great day, and injuries happen, or they just don't get thrown to, or what have you.
And it was one of those. It's just one of those things where, I I find it so interesting how from draft day to now has changed. For instance,
indeed.
in our league, everybody that's on my roster currently, I did not have them, was not on my roster at the beginning of the year.
Sure.
Every person I drafted, or defense I drafted, kicker I drafted, none of them are on my
Roster now.
Yeah, are on my roster now.
And contrast that to, I counted yesterday, because I hadn't thought about it in a while. I've got let's see, how many positions we have? Off the top of my head, I'm forgetting, but I have
16. 10, it's 16 players per roster.
Right. And so I still have 10 of the players or teams, in the case of the defense, that I drafted. And some of them, some of those trades, I definitely regret. I certainly regret giving you Lamar Miller now, because he goes from the Dolphins and now he's playing for the Texans and rocking it.
And
it helps when you give him the ball, though.
Well, and that's one of those things where, like, honestly, he's sixth in the NFL in rushing yards at just over 1,000 rushing yards. He's only had 4 100-yard games this season. He's 10th in the NFL in rushing yards per game at just over 77 rushing yards per game. But I think they need to incorporate him in the passing game a lot more.
Sure.
What we saw last year and in previous years, him with the Miami Dolphins, they were able to check down to him and throw him the ball, and he's a great pass catcher. Why Houston doesn't do that now is a shock to me, but now that since we're talking a little bit about that,
well, we should mention, of course, if you haven't already gotten from the few sentences he's mentioned here, Matt is a Houston Texans fan.
Die-hard Texans fan.
Oh, from the outset, but of course you were an Oilers fan beforehand, and
Absolutely.
then a Titans fan.
I was a Titans fan for a little bit.
When they changed over.
When they changed over. But when I heard back in, I believe it was 2000, when they were going to get the 32nd expansion team, that was actually back when they completely redid all the divisions.
That's true.
Previous to that, they had a West, a Central, and an East.
That's right.
When Houston got that 32nd expansion team and it was the Houston Texans, they switched.
That was back in 2002 when they announced that?
2002 was their first ever season. 2002, 2003.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh! Wow.
Was their first ever season.
Right.
And that year in the off season, they completely changed up all the divisions. Back then, you had in the AFC East, you had New England, you had Indianapolis, you had Miami,
that's right.
you had the Buffalo Bills, you had the New York Jets. I believe those were the only 5 in that division, where they moved Indianapolis to the NFC South.
Right.
To me, I didn't understand at the time. I still don't understand why they moved Indianapolis out of that and did not move, say, Miami to the NFC South.
Most of the country is south of Indianapolis.
Exactly.
Unless you're counting Alaska, but in football you really don't.
Green Bay, Minnesota, Chicago.
Yeah.
But you said I was a diehard Houston Texans fan. You, surprisingly, being from around here, are a Miami Dolphins fan.
Well,
can you explain that?
I can, and there are people close to me that would probably be a little embarrassed that I admit this, but I am who I am. I'm not going to be embarrassed about that. So, okay, when I was a kid, when we were kids, because my brother was a kid when I was too, I really didn't pay that much attention to football. When I was a really little kid, I guess I have memories of thinking highly of the Cowboys because our dad is a huge Cowboys fan. And then
to Staubach and Tom Landry
I mean, the glory days of the Cowboys.
The quote unquote America's team
days of the
days.
Cowboys.
Yes.
Which it's been many a moon since the Cowboys really could, I think, keep that title. It may be controversial for me to say that. I think if, when they kind of get back on top and have a little bit more going for them, maybe they can say that a lot more. But I'm getting on a tangent. So, well,
isn't that what this podcast is going to wind up being?
Many tangents. Yes. Doc Brown's going to jump in any moment and say, we have to go back to the future. The marathon was on this weekend. I watched. Anyway, I got kind of soured on the Cowboys because of our stepdad at the time. This may be a little bit personal. He was into the Cowboys, and we were not particular fans of him. And so, for me, I think at that moment in time when I realized I did kind of like to watch football in elementary school, I gravitated towards the Dolphins. Now, we both grew up here in Amarillo, Cowboys country. It's only now as an adult I realize that there are people here in the Texas Panhandle that enjoy the Broncos, on proximity here. But for me, my favorite color is green. It's a very basic reason to like a team. And back then, I was huge into marine life.
Specifically
Dolphins. I was a dolphin nut when I was a kid. And so when I started realizing I liked football, so I started watching them. And, of course, they're green and that orange, and I like their colors, and followed Dan Marino for a bit. And even back then, I didn't follow football as much as I do now. Like the ins and outs, I didn't know. Of course, when we play football games as a kid, you excelled at those, whereas I excelled at other games. And so I get frustrated really easily. And so I didn't pay as much attention to it, but I certainly do now. And, I can name off more than just a couple players on the team.
Right.
Don't ask me right now. But so that's kind of how I got into the Dolphins, and I kind of kept with it. And of course, after Marino, his latter years with the team, they didn't do a whole lot. The years since then, I've watched the past couple of years, or on the occasion they'd get to the playoffs, and first round, and then they get shot down by the Ravens, and still angry about that particular game. But so that was my evolution into football, and now I follow it. And which has helped me a lot in actually playing fantasy football, and so I'm paying way more attention to it than now. To be fair, not nearly as much as my bearded cohort over here, who can name off stats like any of the commentators on ESPN. I am jealous of that, but I don't want to put the work in to have that ability.
Well, I mean, for me, it's easy. I absolutely love football, whether it's high school.
Well, and sports in general.
Yes, sports in general. But my number one will always be football.
Absolutely.
Whether it's high school, whether it's college, or whether it's pro football. And I say pro football because I love the NFL. Mm-hmm. I love arena football.
No, that's true.
I will even sit and watch a Canadian football league game.
Do they even play? Like, I never see them on ESPN. I'm sure there's a channel that plays them.
No, they actually have it on. It's usually on ESPN2.
I was going to say, or release the Ocho.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Thank you, Dodgeball. That is just classic. But you know what? And I'll let you get back to that in a second. So I looked up how many ESPN networks there were a couple months ago, and I was curious. Okay, so if I remember these off the top of my head, ESPN, of course, ESPN number 2, ESPNU. They're on. ESPN3 is, I think, just online.
Yes.
And then I didn't know that they acquired the SEC network as well.
They started the SEC.
They started the SEC network. Okay.
They also had the Longhorn Network, which is Texas Longhorns sports specifically. I know that's definitely that's an uncomfortable thing for you to say because of how big of an Texas A&M Aggies fan, or should I say Texas Aggies?
Well, that's fine to say, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable. It makes me laugh, honestly. And I'm sorry, Texas Longhorns fans. I actually have Longhorn in my blood. We both went to Caprock here in Amarillo, but I did go to A&M, graduated in 08, and for me, seeing the Texas Longhorns network is just hilarious because I can't imagine they make a whole lot of money off of it. And especially given, now if they had the Longhorn Network 2003, 2004, 2005, when Vince Young, when they won the championship, Vince Young around, Colt McCoy when he was around,
which
I get it. I totally get it.
Wasn't that 2 years after Vince Young won the national championship?
That was 05.
They played Alabama in the national championship game. They had a shot, a legit shot at winning that national championship game. Only problem is that Colt McCoy, about halfway through the first quarter, dropped back for a pass, threw the ball, but got hit and got drove to the ground, hurting his throwing shoulder. But they were still in that game at the end of it, which is amazing. Which is amazing to me, considering how both quarterbacks, Vince Young and Colt McCoy, respectively, have not done anything in the pros.
Oh no, absolutely, yeah. But at that time, and I mean Colt McCoy, I think from my recollection, carried the team quite a bit. Vince Young to a greater degree because he was way more mobile.
Yeah, it was all him. Now McCoy had a little bit of mobility, but I mean, once Vince Young,
he did have some great receivers to throw to.
Absolutely. I honestly can't name any off the top of my head because I didn't write that down. But
we did prepare for this. Excuse me, my brother prepared for this podcast with notes.
You came in with a cup of coffee, a cigar, a lighter, and a cutter, and that was it.
I had a smile on my face. How about that? But again, tangents. You're going to hear some tangents. So Absolutely. If you like funny stories, we're hoping to bring a couple your way. But so again, the Longhorn Network still makes me laugh because I wonder just how much Longhorn fans go to that. You know, I mean, it's great. I like seeing that you have the other sports being highlighted on a network. I mean, I think that should be the case anyway.
Case in point, tonight, the national championship for women's volleyball is Nebraska, which is number 1 in the country, versus Texas, which is number 4 in the country. So that if you're wondering, that's playing tonight on ESPN.
By the time this is up on the web and available for your listening pleasure, though, I'm sure that
not be on.
That winner will be already decided.
Yes. But yeah, you have women's volleyball, men's volleyball, baseball, softball, all the other sports.
They don't get nearly as much attention as they should, but I'm glad that's at least happening.
And you also have, going back to your ESPN point, you also have ESPNU, which is solely college sports.
Right.
Their biggest day of the year is National Signing Day for high school athletes.
Absolutely. Which of course you see on the local news all the time. I mean, that's for sports guys and TV. That is, I don't know. That's almost the Super Bowl because you have so many, young people, so many high school athletes signing and going off to college, and that's very exciting time. Of course, football season in general, just because you have those Friday night football shows and that kind of thing.
And I mean, I actually used to work in TV back behind the scenes, so I do give a lot of credit to people who are on air because that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude, you might say, to do that. I tried to get into TV on the in front of the camera aspect, and it wasn't for me. But I still see every now and then because I'm really good friends with a lot of people that are on camera, and especially that work in sports. I see what they go through to prepare for just a weekly Friday night football show, and it's
a lot
impressive.
Of work. Yeah.
It is very, very impressive.
Well, you have a lot of cogs involved in when everything's working well, and even when you have things certain games that someone gets to, they're late to shoot it, that kind of thing. Even then, you still have an immense ability to keep everything together and keep everything rolling.
But then also you have ESPN News, which is, a lot of the guys that do Sports Center on ESPN News are relatively new or inexperienced.
Well, it's a great training network for some of those people that want to continue to advance in that career.
Absolutely.
Because you're seeing even on ESPN, ESPN2, I would say arguably the main two networks that they have. They get the most viewers, I think. You have new reporters, talking from this location or in-house or whatever all the time. And having that training network, you can bring new people in and really help them get on their feet, so to speak, get their chops as far as being on air.
It's also amazing when you break it down into TV viewership and all like that. It's amazing how many people just work at ESPN.
Right.
Like, case in point, for covering the NFL. Every single NFL team has an ESPN reporter.
Right.
So that's at least 32 people who work on air and post stories to their website.
Not unlike, I would say, and we're not going to get political here, but each cable news network or major news outlet, they have different reporters for different specific things. Foreign correspondent, White House correspondent, someone who covers the Senate and the House and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, senior political analyst and environmental analyst. Just the amount of people that they have, and they could even be on maybe once a week.
Sure.
Once a month.
Right.
But they still do a lot more for whatever they're covering than what most people see on TV.
Oh, absolutely. So we got off onto that tangent, and that's okay. But I did mention earlier the video game situation. Of course, we're in our 20s and 30s, and grew up with video games and continue to this day. And I tell you, one of my passions, I know certainly one of yours, but that was one of the fun things growing up. Well, we would play sports games of just about any kind, except for maybe the Blitz, and even then I was pretty terrible at that. You dominated those games, which was funny because a lot of those games came, I would say, a little bit later. When we were growing up, when we had the Nintendo, we had the Super Nintendo, the Genesis. Eventually, some of those sports games were really, really pretty rough, and so we would play, Super Mario Brothers or Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, that kind of stuff. And those games I tended to dominate.
You dominated in those just because I was never that into those particular kinds of I was interested, but it wasn't like, oh my God, I have to play this.
I want to almost say it's almost a left brain, right brain kind of thing. And I if I had to, I don't remember which side is which as far as the artistic side, the analytical side. But I think in that situation we had a clear dichotomy there. And of course I would grumble whenever we'd play sports games and. To the best of my ability, I would try and just...
Well, and me being the younger, for those viewers that... Or viewers...
Not yet.
And
unless you're imagining our voices here, good luck with that.
For those listeners out there, I'm actually 3.5 years younger than Chris. But I definitely feel... Maturity-wise, I definitely, feel like I'm.
We're on the same.
Older, but
okay. Well, I was going to compliment you and say that our maturity level, I think, is about the same, and that's not a dig on me. I think you had some times in your life where you really had no other choice but to grow up a little bit faster than some of your peers.
And I like you said, I had to grow up. I was dealt. I was kind of dealt with a bad hand genetically.
True. Very true.
Where, yes, you and I come from the same gene pool, but I was second lineage.
I can sum this up very well, and I think you appreciate this, and it does make people laugh. So you got the bad knees, I got the bad eyes.
Yeah,
your situation affects you way more than mine.
What I find interesting in our family, I'm the only one that does not have to use corrective eyewear.
Well, I quite impressive.
Have the best amount of hair as well.
Well, that used to not be the case.
Well, yes,
I'm staring at a man who's easily, well, I've said this on many occasions. You look like Q from Impractical Jokers, but you could easily go with a Grizzly Adams sort of feel. But at one point in time, and I'm clean shaven. Not by choice.
Hair.
Not by choice. Man, if I could have... I used to have long hair down to my shoulders.
Your profession pretty much requires you to go clean shaven.
Fair enough.
Your haircut.
But let's see. 10, 11...
college, though...
I was going to say 10, 11 years ago, it was completely reversed. Mm-hmm. You had a little bit of facial hair. I remember you with a little bit of a soul patch.
Well, I mean...
I had all the facial hair at that time.
I was 17, 18, 19 years old. Yeah, I could grow it out if I wanted to. I just chose not to back then.
And I grew everything out. And man, let me tell you, to any of the bearded friends and listeners out there who have ever been called Sasquatch or Chewbacca or Grizzly Adams, I got all the fun names.
For the listeners out there, pretty much Chris's go-to Halloween costume is werewolf. That's pretty much
that says it all. Yeah.
He can, not to give you a repulsive image, but he can take his shirt off and be known as Sasquatch or as werewolf quite a bit.
I was trying to go not TMI, but I hope that brings a smile to some people's faces.
Whereas as far as the only place on my body that I can actually grow great hair is on my face and on the top of my head. That's pretty much it.
I've told you got great hair, but great hair kind of it follows in our family quite a bit.
Absolutely.
So let's see. You're about a third of the way in. I guess I'm about the same. Mm-hmm. What are your to go back to the second generation? What are your impressions so far as you're lighting? I guess I'll mention just a bit again. The smoothness continues on. When I tasted this yesterday, I did not really get much of a difference in flavor from beginning to the end. I think it was pretty well uniform, which I appreciate. But I mean, like I said, I like this cigar.
Well, I'm the exact same way. I mean, this is definitely not a complex cigar, which in the cigar world, something that is known as complex usually is from when you smoke it at the beginning. Mm-hmm. The flavors change as you're smoking it down.
Right.
Whereas this one, and honestly, most of the cigars produced nowadays, I would say it's almost like a 50-50 split, mm-hmm. where about 50 of them are simple. There's not much of a change in the taste from beginning to end.
Right.
But some of them are very complex.
Sure.
Some of those some of them are great, mm-hmm. but then most of the cigars that are complex nowadays, I'm just kind of like, I'm not that crazy. I'm not that crazy about really complex, high change difference cigars.
Well, and it's something to be admired, certainly, in the construction of a cigar, because there's a lot that goes into it. I've only seen the construction of a cigar a couple times in my life, and it's very cool. And certainly, the more complex, the level of difficulty going up. But just in the case, let's say, beer, wine, you don't necessarily have to be complex for it to be a great great product, or even just a really good product. And so this cigar really benefits from that, I think.
For our listeners out there, if you're interested, go to YouTube and look up cigar making process. Just type that up, mm-hmm. and I'm almost certain you could find tons and tons of videos out there basically going from planting the seed, growing the tobacco to when they cut it, the fermentation room where they they put all the cigar leaves on top of each other, just let it ferment. And having to change the levels up at any certain time, to the rolling rooms, to the aging rooms after that. It takes anywhere from I think anywhere from a year to 5 years, depending on how long cigar manufacturer lets the cigar sit and age.
Sure.
It takes anywhere from 1 to 5 years to go from planting to us sitting here smoking it.
It's really a fascinating process. If you're a fan of documentaries on YouTube or Vice or Netflix or whatever, and you want to learn something about something you never knew, if you're not into cigars, just watching that, you'll get an appreciation of it. And really, there's so much work that goes into it, as opposed to, and this might be, at least in the cigar industry, a little bit more political, I guess you could say, as opposed to machine-rolled cigars, or even just, cigarettes. Now, if that's your thing, I'm not dogging on that. If that's your thing, fine. Personally, I'm not a fan. I'd rather have this. We had this conversation yesterday, briefly, about the difference in the experience. For people, those that I know that smoke cigarettes, a different experience, certainly a level of addiction that's quite obvious. With cigar smokers, I've never known anybody who's become addicted. And personally, I average, if I'm being generous here, I average probably one cigar every week and a half. Matt's laughing at me because he smokes, a couple a day?
Well, with the way my work is now, granted, I'm actually off work right now because I got hurt a few weeks ago.
But in general, your average. What's your average?
My average.
It helps that you can smoke at work, though.
Well, I'm in a truck. I'm in a truck most of my day by myself. So that's where I listen to a bunch of my podcasts.
Indeed.
I would almost every single one of them is football related or fantasy football related at this point.
Right.
Once we get past, January, then I'll go to maybe basketball, possibly. But I smoke. My average is probably maybe 2 cigars a day.
Sure.
Which, to give a little more history, going on another small tangent. We're full of tangents and surprises on this inaugural podcast of the Martin Squared podcast.
I just like to use that word, actually.
I have been smoking cigars since June 25th, 2005, which was the day I turned 18 years old. Our grandfather, on our dad's side, smoked White Owl cigars, flavored cigars. I lived with him and my dad for the last maybe 4 years of his life, and that's what really drew me into smoking cigars. I went to a local cigar shop here in Amarillo, Texas, and was wanting to do this as a celebratory thing in honor of him because he unfortunately passed away before I turned 18, so I couldn't sit and enjoy a cigar with him.
And I like to think that to this day, a little bit of every cigar that we smoke is a little bit of celebrating his life. In that he enjoyed these, we found that we enjoyed these, and we continue that on. So back to about 2 cigars a day.
Yeah, I smoke about 2 cigars a day. Like I said, I've been smoking since June of 2005. So over the years, my palate has developed.
Oh, sure.
Surprisingly, my palate hasn't actually noticed a lot of things out of a cigar up until about 2010.
Right.
From about 2010 on, my palate really has picked up. Most of the flavor notes that people get out of a cigar are a black pepper,
Right.
what they consider an earthy note, which is various kinds of earthy notes.
Makes sense. All the different leaves involved in not only the tobacco itself, but the filler, but then the binders and the wrappers.
Oh, also it goes down to what soil they're using.
Oh, absolutely.
Case in point, in Nicaragua, they have an active volcano. Volcano? Yes.
This is a shout out to
Sorry.
Sal Volcano from Impractical Jokers, one of our favorite TV shows.
Yes. So, Crispy, if you're listening, we thank you.
Yeah.
But volcano,
Right.
There's an active volcano in Nicaragua that, will every now and then just kind of spew ash.
Of course.
That ash settles down into the soil. It replenishes the soil,
Nutrients in the soil.
nutrients in the soil, to where that's why, like, for me, the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua are basically like a 1A, 1B, in my opinion, on the best cigars in the world.
Yeah, I agree.
I would have to give the edge to Nicaragua.
Okay.
Even though we're technically smoking a Dominican cigar right now. The reason why I have to give the edge to Nicaragua is because they have...
Next time, Nikki.
Yeah, they have the greatest variant of regions that they grow tobacco in.
Sure. Benefit of having
Right.
having the size of country you do.
I think they have four. It's Ometepe,
Okay.
Condega region, Esteli, and Jalapa Valley.
Okay.
I believe those are the four regions in Nicaragua where they grow tobacco.
Feel free
Now-
to comment on this and correct us if we're wrong.
Now, Esteli, the region around Esteli, Nicaragua that grows their tobacco is mainly used for combustion purposes.
Okay.
So it's a high potent. That's where you get most of the power from a cigar.
Okay.
Now, in a cigar, about 70 to 75% of the flavors you get out of a cigar actually come from the wrapper. They don't come from the binder and filler.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. Okay.
Most of the binder filler is used for burn purposes.
Sure.
Whereas, like the Jalapa Valley, where they grow it, it's a lot more smooth.
Okay.
It's a little complex. The tobacco is a little complex there, but it's very smooth.
Sure.
And then Condega and Ometepe, they're also used mainly for flavor as well.
Okay.
That's just a little bit into the science
Sure.
of smoking of a cigar.
Well,
the construction and all like that.
I had no idea that most of the flavor you get is from the wrapper itself. I was thinking that you were getting flavors from everything all the way down to the filler itself. So I find that pretty interesting. But it is, I mean, just like in any agricultural field, the better the soil is, and I think any farmer would tell you, the better product you're going to have. Mind you, you have other factors that go into that, and that's why most of the cigar producers, the high-end cigar producers, just about anybody, you're going to find in those better climates because you're going to get tons of rain and everything like that. But not only do you have the soil profile, the moisture content, and nutrients involved that help to positively affect the flavor and just the product in general. How well it's constructed. But then the process that's gone into that, the aging process, which I before really I didn't know about when I first started getting into cigars, how much that affects. Just like with any wine, or I think in harder liquors, the aging process is a big factor there as well.
Which, I mean, between the two of us, see, you're more of a craft beer fan, whereas I'm more of a Scotch bourbon type of fan.
Right. And I'm trying to get into the Scotch just a bit. I'd like to develop more of that habit, but I do enjoy my craft beers. The darker, the better. Just like with my cigars, I prefer, as far as flavor is concerned.
That's a loaded statement right there.
The darker cigars, I like those a lot better. I do appreciate the milder flavors and the lighter wrappers. I would say like with coffee, but I like coffee just about any way you can get it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm the same way. Going for kind of my preference as far as cigars. For me, it all depends on it all depends on the type of day, or it all depends on the time of day.
Oh, sure.
Also depends on the type of day. Like if it's a sunny day, especially during the wintertime, if it's a sunny day, I will smoke a little bit heavier cigars, a little more full-bodied cigars.
Much in the same way that maybe a craft beer lover like myself would prefer, with a cold, wintry day, something heavier.
But usually in the mornings, I will smoke a mild, like a Connecticut shade wrapper, which the reason why it's called Connecticut shade is Connecticut's one of, if not the only state or region in the country that grows cigar tobacco.
Now go into that a little bit, because I've always seen the Connecticut's and I enjoy them as well, but I just wouldn't imagine that they have the climate for that. So what is involved there that makes that sets them up for that particular success?
They do get roughly the same amount of moisture. The temperature is a little bit different. A lot of their cigars, if I'm not mistaken, or a lot of their cigar tobacco is shade grown. That's the reason why with the Connecticut shade, it's a much lighter, it's a much lighter shade of tobacco.
You're not getting the pigments like you would in the more...
Like in a Maduro wrapper. The Maduro wrapper is grown a little bit longer and is aged a little bit longer. Whereas the Connecticut shade, it grows to a certain point, then they cut the tobacco off of it, and they only age it a certain length, a lot shorter length than a Maduro or a sun-grown wrapper, or it's a little bit more brownish, to where the Connecticut shades are a tan color.
Now is there I feel like I've noticed some texture differences in the wrapper as well. Like I almost want to say a thicker wrapper with a darker cigar compared to a Connecticut. Am I correct in that, or am I just kind of making that up? Just slight observations.
Very slight. There's a very slight difference. With cigars, the wrapper is the most delicate and the thinnest, the most thin tobacco leaf are the wrappers. Once you get into the binder,
just in general anyway.
Yeah,
okay.
The binder and fillers, there's a little bit more of a thickness to it.
Different ways they grow those as well compared to the wrappers, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. But yeah, the wrappers, and it's it is surprising where most of the flavor comes out of a wrapper but it's really with a very thin wrapper that you get.
And compared to the rest of the cigar.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what would you put a percentage on? Just if looking at the circumference here, percentage on the what the wrapper is compared to the rest of the tobacco in the cigar. I mean,
which by the way, this DBL Second Generacion that we're smoking is a Toro size.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is usually kind of a 6.5 to 7 by a 52 ring gauge. Which the ring gauges are based on inches, where like this is 52/60ths of an inch.
Okay,
Where,
okay.
You know, if it's what most people consider an inch to be 60 of 60.
Oh, okay, okay. This is something I didn't know. Gotcha.
That's where
yeah.
you get. That's where you get you know, the 52, the, you know, 6 by 48s, or
Well, and
you know,
such a range going from the cigarillo size.
yeah, which is like a,
damn near
which
a
is almost like a
cigarette.
which is like, could be a 38 ring gauge,
Right.
to where you get up to, I know, Asylum cigars,
Mm-hmm.
they make an 80 ring gauge, which, I mean, you pretty much, I mean, it's, some people, they call that a jawbreaker.
I didn't know that. There's been a couple of those cigars, and I can't think of any others off the top of my head that just giant ring gauges. I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, this is going to sound terrible. I can't handle that. So,
but going back to your point on the wrapper,
Mm-hmm.
the ratio here is going to be, the filler is going to be probably about maybe
Matt,
30%.
math was never Matt's strong suit. It was mine, but really wasn't.
Well,
his.
I mean, no, it was, but you know, I was more.
When it comes to cigars, you do know the math.
Yeah, it's usually about maybe 33%.
Okay.
Of
the
filler.
entire. Okay.
The binder is going to be almost like I would go so far as to say maybe 50%.
Oh, okay.
Of this.
Wow. Gotcha.
So like when you get into, like, hypothetically,
Mm-hmm.
now this is the only size that Francisco makes in this cigar.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
You would actually notice a difference if he made multiple sizes
Mm-hmm.
of the cigar. You would notice a difference in flavor between, like, a Lancero,
Mm-hmm.
which is a 7 by 46.
That first number, by the way, was the length in inches.
Yes, like a 7 inches by 46 to 44,
Right.
or, you know, to a, you know, 6.5 by 52, like this one is, or what they call a Gordo, which is 6 by 60.
Right.
The smaller the ring gauge, the more flavors, kind of the higher potency of flavors you're going to get out of a cigar.
Makes
That's
sense.
where people that a lot of times the bigger ring gauge cigars, they're going to be more kind of medium bodied strength. The smaller, they're actually going to be kind of more full bodied in strength,
A little bit more
because of
intense.
a little more intense because of how much the ratio between wrapper to binder filler is.
Right.
You know, there's a lot more binder filler in a big ring gauge cigar than there is in a small ring gauge cigar like a Lancero.
Right.
And once again, we'd like to thank Danny Jones, owner of Jones Cowan Pipe and Tobacco Shop, for providing the space for this episode of Martin Squared.
Okay, friends, that's part 1. Part 2 is available now as well.